What's up everybody, my name is Dan Berkowitz, owner of To Skateboards, and today I'm actually going to teach you how to skateboard from start to finish. Well, there's no finishing point. You're never done skateboarding, you're never done progressing, you're never done learning how to skateboard. But in this video, I'm going to take you through all the basics, all the fundamentals on how to get started, how to start pushing on your board, how to get comfortable, and we can go from there. So let's start with stances. The first step to stepping on a skateboard is to determine what is your stance. Your stance is either regular or goofy. Now there's no right or wrong stance on your skateboard. You're going to get started with whichever stance is most comfortable for you. And what's partially going to determine that is which foot you're most comfortable pushing with. So when you stand on a skateboard in the regular stance, you're going to have your left foot in front, your right foot in the back. You're going to push with your right foot, your back foot. In skateboarding, you always want to push with your back foot. If you push with your front foot, that's called Mongo pushing. It is frowned upon only because you're just less stable on your board. You're not going to get as good of a push pushing Mongo. Always push with your back foot. That's the regular stance. The goofy stance is the opposite. You have your right foot in front, so you're facing the other direction essentially. Right foot is in front, left foot is in back, and you're pushing with your left foot. Now the only way to really find out and determine what your stance is to step on the board, which might be scary at first. Now the best way to step on a board for the first time is to grab some kind of supports. This wall is a bad example, but if I were to put my board down here, hold on to the wall, and step on it, the wall is going to give me some kind of stability. What I recommend is you find yourself like a fence of some sort or a gate. Hold on to that with both hands and just see which way, it feels more comfortable standing on the board. One thing I always say is, hey, if you kick a ball with your right foot, you might be more likely to push with your right foot. At least that's the case for me. I'm a regular skater. My left foot is in front, right foot does the pushing. But for a lot of people, it's the opposite. A lot of people who push with their left foot actually kick a ball with their right foot. Because your front foot is going to be where you're going to put most of your weight. You always want most of your weight on your front foot when you're riding your skateboard because that's going to give you the most stability. If you've ever tried to ride down a hill on your skateboard and you've experienced speed wobbles, which is when your board just starts losing control, shaking uncontrollably, it's because you were skating down this hill with too much weight on your back foot on your trucks. You want to steer a skateboard the same way that a car steers, with the front trucks, for the most part. As you get more comfortable and confident on your board and you fully understand how to shift your weight around, you might start playing around with steering with that back truck when it's more appropriate to do so. So that is stances. Whichever foot you're more comfortable putting more weight on is going to be your front foot. Whichever foot you're more comfortable pushing with is going to be your back foot. Now let's get into pushing, how to push on your skateboard. You almost want to practice rolling on your board with just one foot on it. One foot on it being your front foot. If you can balance on one foot on your skateboard, on just your front foot, you're going to have no trouble pushing. Because when you're pushing on your skateboard, you're transitioning back and forth from having just one foot on the board to having 2 feet on the board. And that's because while you're pushing, you're going to have to take your back foot off the board to push. There's going to be just your front foot on the board with the majority of your weight on it. And the key to the pushing technique is to have your body facing forwards while you push in the direction that you're actually going and pushing. So your body's going to be about perpendicular to the board. Your front foot is going to be on the board facing forward, and your back foot is also going to be facing forwards in the direction that you're skating, except the only difference is you're going to be transitioning from having your back foot on the board to off the board. And you're going to be transitioning, shifting your weight from your left foot to your right foot. Now the majority of your weight is going to be on your front foot. But to really get the push to work, you need to shift some of the weight from your front foot, which is on the board, to your back foot to kick off the ground and get a good push. And while doing so with your front foot, while you're pushing off, you almost want to launch it forwards. Give your board some forward momentum with that front foot as you kick off, and that's going to get you a very good push, a very strong push. Now, as I mentioned, when you're pushing on your skateboard, you are facing forwards. You're facing in the direction that your board is going. When you're done pushing, when you have sufficient speed, enough speed to start cruising around, say you're riding down a hill, then you can start to actually shift your body to be parallel with the board. That's how you'll see most people skating out there. And as for your foot setup, when you're steering, pushing, cruising, regardless, for the most part, your front foot, you're going to want to have it either on the bolts, on the front bolts, or slightly behind it. Having your front foot behind the bolts is going to help you when setting up for tricks, which you'll get into down the road. But having your front foot on your bolts is going to give you a lot more stability and a lot more control, especially when it comes to steering your board. As I mentioned, the majority of your weight is going to be on your front foot for the optimal board control. So if your front foot is too close to the nose, the board is naturally just going to pop up and you're going to lose it. So yeah, front foot either on the bolts or right behind it. Back foot is going to be on the tail for the most part. Now, as I mentioned, most of the weight's going to be on the front foot. You want to be careful with how much weight and how much pressure you apply to your tail because you don't want it to pop up and hit you. What you want to do with your back foot is have less weight on it. And later in this video, we'll get into different techniques as to when you should shift weight to your tail. Obviously, to pop an ollie, to do a kickflip, you do need to apply pressure on that tail. You need to shift it from your front foot to your back foot. But we're not there yet. So just to reiterate, regardless of your stance, when standing on the board, front foot for the most part is going to be on the bolts or right behind it. Back foot is going to be on the tail. Now I mentioned earlier that when you're pushing, you're facing forwards. You're facing pretty much perpendicular with the board in the direction that you're actually skating. The same goes with your front foot. Your front foot is going to be facing forwards. It's going to be facing in the direction that you're skating for the most part. You might angle it slightly diagonally. Your back foot is going to be pretty much sideways as well. It was facing forwards while you were pushing. Then as you pivot, you put it on the board with your toes pointing out. You might not be comfortable at all standing on the board when you're just first starting your first day on the board, which is why I recommended that you grab onto something. Grab onto something while you're skating. And if it is your first time skating, I recommend you definitely wear a helmet and probably some pads too, because there are techniques to falling, which we'll get into shortly as well. And that's the thing, before you learn how to skateboard, you really need to learn how to fall. You need body control in addition to board control so that you don't get hurt. Alright, so that's all there is to it for determining your stance on your board, pushing on your board, and cruising. When it comes to now steering, when you're steering on your board, for the most part, it's going to be done while you're cruising. And the way you do it is you shift weight from your toe to your heel. So if you're a regular skater, your left foot is in front. If you want to turn right, you're going to shift some weight to your toes. And you can do this actually on both feet, but it's definitely best to do more of this. Weight shift to your toes with that front foot. So you want to turn left. Shift some weight to your heels. That's going to allow the truck to turn. It's going to apply some pressure there. And it's going to lead you in the direction that you want to go. So that is steering. It's something that you're going to have to play around with. All this skateboarding stuff, it's going to be an iterative process. You're going to need to be very patient. You're going to need to be determined. You're not going to get it at first. You're not going to get instant gratification from riding a skateboard. Let's make that clear. So that's why skateboarding is not for all people. You're not going to learn how to kickflip on your first day skateboarding unless you're just magically gifted. Alright, we've covered off on determining your stance. We've covered off on cruising, on steering the board, shifting your weight from your toe to your heel depending on which direction you're planning to go in. Now the next two things we're going to get into here to really close out this video on teaching you how to skateboard so that you're ready to get out there and go have some fun is falling, learning how to fall safely, and also learning how to properly apply pressure to that tail to help you maneuver around on your board. That's going to be really your first step to getting into learning skateboard tricks, because a lot of tricks, especially the ollie, are really about shifting your weight from your front foot to your back foot, applying pressure on that tail. When it comes to shifting weight to your tail and all that stuff, find yourself a very stable environment. As I mentioned before about holding on to an object, for example, when I was younger, I learned some stuff on my skateboard by setting it up on a rug. I'd put my board on a rug, I'd hold on to a couch, and that's how I've learned how to kind of maneuver my board in all sorts of different ways. And you can do a similar technique. You can hold on to like a pole or anything that is near some pavement and try and learn just how to stand on it, how to get comfortable, and that'll maybe be helpful for when you're starting to learn how to apply pressure to your tail, which we're about to discuss right now. So when it comes to applying pressure on your tail, this is super fundamental to doing things like kick turns, which are when you essentially pivot, do a 180, which is typically done at a skate park, on a ramp, on a bank. But right now I'm going to show you on flat ground how to do what is called tic-tacking. Tic-tacking is really the way that you get comfortable on your skateboard. You might see people land a trick and then tic-tac a little bit to stabilize themselves. That's literally when you're applying pressure on your tail and just trying to, move that front truck around. And people might think it's frowned upon to tic-tac, but when you're just starting to learn how to skateboard, this is super important that you have this comfortability. So what is tic-tacking? It's essentially what it sounds like. Tic-tacking is when you apply some pressure to your tail, so therefore you lift up the tail, it's on these two wheels, and then you smack it back down. You smack the board back down so that it's back on all four wheels. So tic-tac, you apply pressure to that back foot, you shift some weight from your front foot to your back foot to allow this to happen. And you can either have your front foot on the bolts or behind it. The board's going to lift up more easily if your front foot is behind the bolts, but having it on the bolts is going to give you more stability for this motion. So practice applying pressure to the back foot, shifting some from the front foot, some of that weight, and smack it back down. Smack it back down with that front foot by applying that pressure. Stomp the board down with the front foot. And you can practice doing this side to side. What that's going to entail is kind of moving your shoulders around, getting your upper body a little bit involved, and your toes as well. A lot of the motion when applying pressure to the tail, it's mostly in your toes. Especially anything on your skateboard. When you're doing anything, you want to be on your toes. You do not want to be flat-footed. You do not want to be on your heels. That's going to give you little to no leverage or board control. Your toes are what generate most of the power. So you're going to apply the pressure to your toes. Now you can use your toes to kind of angle, alright, which way am I going to go? And, apply some pressure forwards on those toes if you want the front of the board to go backwards. Apply some pressure on the tail backwards if you want the front foot to go forwards. And use your front foot to also help guide the board around. Tic-tacking is great. It is the ideal way as a beginner skateboarder to get comfortable applying pressure to the back foot. Applying pressure to the tail and lifting it up so that you are on two wheels. Now be careful, don't lean back too much. Leaning back too much, you're gonna fall, you're gonna go flying. And that's something you'll see, especially when you're going down like a bank. If you find yourself going to a skate park in your early days skating, just be careful when rolling down a bank, because as I mentioned, leaning back too much, it's gonna send the board flying forwards, you go flying backwards, you get hurt. So especially when rolling down a surface that is like a hill, a bank, apply that pressure to your front foot. Now once you get super comfortable with your tic-tacking around, you can actually start playing around with manuals, which are what you would call a wheelie on a skateboard when you're actually riding on those two wheels. Just be mindful, you do not want your tail to scrape the ground. It'll cause your board to wear down, and your board will just not last as long if you're scraping it against the ground. So just be careful when you are trying to do manuals once you're ready for that. You're going to need to be careful, you don't lean back too much. But yeah, we have trick tips for that, for manuals, for ollies, for all those things. So once you're comfortable with the tic-tacs, start checking out all our tutorials. We upload all our tutorials to Shorts, and then we also have, them all on Instagram and TikTok. So once you're ready for that, go check those videos out. Now, the last thing I'm going to cover off on today is how to safely fall on your skateboard. What you can also recognize is just how to stop on your skateboard. So we're going to do those two things hand in hand, how to safely stop and how to safely fall for beginners. Now when it comes to safely stopping or falling, one technique that I think is very good, super popular, and a good thing to get comfortable doing is what I call the jump and run technique. That is when you are uncomfortable on your board, so you literally just jump off of it, and any speed that you have, you just run it out. Like this. The jump and run technique is great for beginners because it teaches you how to safely, get on and off your board, teaches you how to safely fall, how to ditch your board. Just make sure you're not going too fast when you're doing this. The other technique that's for beginners for how to stop on your board is what I call the foot brake. Now it might wear down your shoes a bit, But the whole idea is that you have the majority of your weight on your front foot. You get into the stance that you're in when you're pushing. So having your front foot on the bolts, you're facing forwards in the direction that you're going on your board. And your back foot is going to gently touch down on the asphalt, on the pavement, whatever surface you're skating. And it's going to help slow you down gradually. Don't all at once, don't just stop down with that foot or you're going to probably hurt yourself. Just very gradually apply little bits and little more amounts of pressure on your foot on the pavement, and that's going to help slow you down. That's called foot braking. Now there are more advanced techniques to stopping, like power slides, which I do a lot of to stop. We have tutorials for that once you're more comfortable on your board, but definitely not a beginner way to stop. So stopping, either jump and run or do some foot brake action. Try to avoid, as I mentioned earlier, scraping your tail. A lot of beginners will apply all the pressure on their tail to stop, and what that's just going to do is wear down your tail and your board's just not going to last as long. Now if you're about to absolutely eat it and you don't have the time to jump off your board, you're not in a position where you are planning to stop, you lost board, you lost your board, you fell off, you're going flying. You need to practice jumping off your board and rolling. That is the more popular technique once you get more into skateboarding. We don't really need to get into that today, but the whole idea with rolling is that you carry your momentum forward. If you want to hurt yourself falling on a skateboard, the key way to do that is to just stop your momentum all at once, all in one place. You'll see a lot of people, they'll be wearing wrist guards at the skate park because maybe they've broken a wrist or they've broken their arm in the past from skateboarding, and that's because what they probably did was they had a lot of speed and they all at once fell off their board, put their hands down, and all that momentum went to a stop, but all that went right to their hands. So if you want to get hurt falling, you fall in a manner where your momentum just stops. But if you want to fall safely, you're going to do what's called rolling. You're going to practice the roll technique. Similarly to how you see in movies when someone jumps out of a moving car, they do so by rolling away. It's a little different with skateboarding because you're going to want to roll and continue rolling in the direction that you were skating so your momentum continues forwards and gradually slows down. So for example, if I'm jumping off a stair set and I get to the bottom of it and I lose my board, or say I catch an edge, say I get some wheel bite, and I go flying off my board, I'm not just going to go right to my hands, or right to my knees, or right to my butt. I'm going to try and roll. I usually tuck my head down and usually kind of roll off my elbows. It's like parkour. So I'm not going to film any examples of that, but practice just ditching your board and rolling off of it. That's just going to teach you how to safely fall when you have lost all board control. Alright, that's all I got for basic fundamentals today on how to skateboard. I hope you found this video helpful. That should be everything you need to get started and get rolling on your board. And if you don't have a board yet, you need a board. We've got a bunch of them on our website, howtoskateboards.com, all for an affordable price. If you don't need a board, if you need wheels, bearings, we should have everything you need.